USC last week released some weights and heights and all sorts of numbers and facts and figures. So let's dig into just some of the things that you saw with that initial release, and the physical profiles. Obviously, we've talked a lot about culture and mindset, professional attitude, professional approach, those kinds of things. But now we get into measurables, some more tangible things. So, of all the things that you've digested over the past several days, what are the things that stand out the most to you as you look at this? Get this first glance at the 2025 USC football roster.
Yeah, for sure. Let me go ahead and pull up another article. I think it's another Trojans Wire article. Trojans Wire is on fire today, Matt. But so some notable weight changes since spring practice on USC's roster. It's a lot of offensive line guys. You've got Aaron Dunn, who gained 25 pounds over the summer. You've got Hayden Trader, another offensive lineman, who's up 15 pounds. Walter Matthews, who's a tight end, not an offensive lineman, but we'll probably see a lot in blocking, up to 285 from 272. Another offensive lineman, Elijah Vacona. Alani Noah, another offensive lineman who's projected to be kind of a starter and a guy who has a big role, up 20 pounds. Prince Strahan, I'm going to skip for now because I'm going to come back to him. Alex Payne, similarly, gained 40 pounds, is up to 305 from 265 when he first signed. So that's a huge difference there. Shout out to Alex, obviously. That's a huge accomplishment for him. So, all of the ones that this article points out, and I think very kind of astutely, a lot of offensive linemen there. I do want to highlight Prince Strahan specifically just for a second, just because I think him putting on 11 pounds is really interesting. He's obviously a guy who is, USC is kind of trying to figure out who is going to be, I'm sure, the third wide receiver behind Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. Obviously, Lake McCree is probably going to get a lot more action this year than in years past, the tight end as well. But, there's not really a clear number 3 guy at wide receiver. And I'm sure that's going to kind of work itself out in battles in camp. But for Prince Strahan, like putting on 11 pounds to a frame that's already, 6 feet 5 inches tall, I'm sure that's going to benefit him quite a bit. Just looking at his stats at Boise State, not a lot of production, only had 37 catches in 2 years, but was really good at, the longer plays, had over 15 yards a catch. So he's a big target that's become an even bigger target. He's a guy you could find, I'm sure, in downfield plays, and putting on some strength. Maybe he breaks some more tackles. Maybe he's even more physically imposing for those defensive backs to try to cover. So I think that's going to become a real advantage for him in particular. And it is a notable storyline, I think, because he's, like I said, a guy who was at a program last year that was a college football playoff program in Boise State. Should be, competitive for some real meaningful time at wide receiver. So, lots of offensive line, and then Prince Strahan really astutely pointed out storylines there. Curious on your thoughts, though, Matt.
Well, to me, when you see all those weight gains on the offensive line, to me, that means one thing, and that is the thing that almost every USC fan wants to see: run the dang ball. Student body right. Let's mash some people. Let's lean on some people, and let's just be physical and nasty and rugged in ways that USC offensive lines haven't generally been. And obviously, with Jaden Maiava, a running quarterback, as your signal caller, there will be some read option plays. There will be some finesse plays in the package, but being able to mash the ball between the tackles and being able to run the ball with your setbacks on carries or pitches, that's going to make Jaden Maiava's life a lot easier. Now, obviously, it'll set up the downfield passing game for USC if the Trojans can be really consistent. And this is a point that we've made before, but it's worth making it again. That USC's average yards per carry last year was around 5, which looks really really good on paper. But that 5 yard average, more or less, was gain 10, gain 0, gain 9, gain 1. It's not as though USC was getting 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6, 4. It was like a 9 yard run and then 1 or 0, and an 11 yard run and then a -1. Obviously, I agree. Let's be very clear here. Lincoln Riley does need to continue to work the run game. He can't always be throwing the ball on 2nd and 9 just because he got stuffed on 1st and 10. He needs to stick with the run game a little bit more than he did last season. And the thing that you, Ethan, have really drilled deep on was, run the ball on 2nd and goal from the 5. You get stuffed on first down inside the 10. You need to be able to go back to the running game instead of throwing a bleepity bleep and fade pass on 2nd and goal from the 5. So obviously, just very clear, Ethan and I are both on the record as saying, yes, Lincoln needs to trust that run game a little more. You can't always abandon it. Obviously, on 2nd and 9, that's generally a passing down, but there needs to be a few more occasions where USC is willing to run the ball on consecutive snaps so that defenses can't get that firm expectation that, oh, it's 2nd and 9, a pass is coming. You can't be that predictable. You do have to mix things up. And there's the other point that, the screen game or the short passing game, like a quick hitch, technically it's a pass, but essentially it's a run. It's an extended handoff. So in other words, on 2nd and 9, if you're throwing a screen or a quick hitch, that shouldn't necessarily be interpreted as abandoning the running game because, again, that's an extended handoff. It's more of 2nd and 9, let's do 7-step drop and let's search well down the field and nothing's there, incomplete pass. That would be abandoning the run game. But anyway, Ethan, like these increased weights tell me that USC really does want to lean on people. We've talked about it so often in this very long off season, which is thankfully about to end. We get to see a new season, but Lincoln Riley did not trust his offensive line to get the tough yard, to grind things out, 3rd and short, 4th and short. He bailed, and he shouldn't have. But I understand why he did it. That it was not where USC was getting 5 yards every carry. The average was 5, but it's not as though 5 yards was the representative gain on every carry. To me, Ethan, it seems as though that's really the main story to take away from all these weight gains up front.
Yeah, I think something else that's really interesting to kind of note here about a lot of these offensive linemen is a lot of them are young guys. Like Aaron Dunn is a freshman early enrollee. Hayden Trader's a redshirt freshman. Walter Matthews is a younger guy. True freshman. Alani Noah is obviously a junior. He's like the biggest name on this list outside of Prince Strahan, I would say. Probably even a bigger name than Prince Strahan in terms of his expected commitment to the USC football team this year. And then Alex Payne, true freshman. I think what you're seeing, too, is a lot of guys who really took it upon themselves to not take any days off over the summer and, put their best foot forward in terms of getting themselves physically ready for the season. Because, they're as aware as anybody that this 2026 recruiting class is coming and that, jobs are really going to be at a premium when, all these really super talented 4 and 5 stars come in. And if you're, a freshman ahead of this 2026 recruiting class, that gives you 1 year to really establish yourself before, these guys that come in that are super talented. So I think it's probably a lot of them that just saw who was coming and, probably also heard from Tremaine Carroll a little bit and what his expectations were and said, shoot, like I got to really put my best foot forward and put 110% into these next couple of months ahead of the season. And not to say that they weren't going to do that already, but, maybe it's perhaps a little bit extra motivation having those guys behind you and having, Tremaine Carroll coming in and just the situation being like, this year is really big to my entire career at USC. I have an opportunity now to fight for, meaningful downs and meaningful plays, because it's not as deep of a team as it's going to be next year. But next year the team gets deeper, and snaps at practice become a little bit more of a premium. So if I make an impression on this coaching staff, then I can really put myself a leg up on some of these more talented kids that have a lot of talent, obviously, but don't have the established kind of repertoire with the coaching staff. So I think that's probably an unseen between the line storyline about all this, because it's so many young guys. So, and obviously part of that's just it's their first year in college. You have kind of, it's a big shift between high school and college. The way that you approach things becomes rapidly quickly. But I do think that the situation that USC is in as a program right now is definitely informing that change as well.
Let's now take this larger theme of a lot more beef up front for USC and apply it not just to the running game, but we've talked about this in a certain framework over the offseason, but now let's apply it to the first few games on USC's schedule. So Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, right out of the chute. To me, I think when people refer to, we need to try some things on offense, need to try some things with our personnel, that often gets interpreted reasonably, I might add, as a quarterback thing. We need to see what kind of plays work for this quarterback. Need to see what kinds of passes, what kinds of play designs are comfortable for him. That's a reasonable thing. I'm not knocking it. I'm not criticizing it. But maybe with all these weight gains for offensive linemen, maybe this year with this early soft ramp up in the first 3 weeks of the schedule, maybe this idea of test driving the offense is less about seeing what works for Jaden Maiava and more what works for this offensive line. That maybe that might be the better framework to go about this. Like, if this offensive line can't mash against Missouri State, Georgia Southern, and Purdue, right? And so, like, you need these first 3 games not to establish Jaden Maiava's confidence. You need these first 3 games to establish the offensive line's confidence. And then if you do that, when you go into the Big Ten schedule, Michigan State and especially Illinois, then you'll have that offensive line clicking and trusting each other and knowing exactly what to do. And then the hope would be, conceptually, that will then feed into Jaden Maiava not only getting better protection, but being able to process plays, make reads with a comfort zone, which will lead to elite performance. So that's my question for you, Ethan. The first 3 games, is it more about establishing Jaden Maiava's confidence or about establishing the offensive line's confidence? And before I hand it over to you for your answer, obviously the two go hand in hand. Obviously the 2 projects run together. But in terms of like an emphasis, it's so easy for us to think about, well, Lincoln Riley needs Jaden Maiava confident. Yeah, of course he does. There's like, none of this implies that's not a huge and central need. Of course it is. But in terms of what the primary point of emphasis is in these first 3 games USC is going to be expected to win easily. Like, there is something to the idea of, as a coaching staff, well, A is a bigger priority than B. And that's what I'm asking. Is the offensive line's confidence more of a priority than Jaden Maiava's confidence? They both matter a ton. They're both central to the season. But if you had to pick one over the other, which one would it be?
I think I would pick the offensive line. And I think that's because I think Lincoln Riley has realized this offseason and has said as much, that the trenches matter so much more in the Big Ten than they did in the Pac-12. And so I think that is probably going to be the emphasis. And also, I just think, you're looking at a situation at USC where, you want Hassan Longstreet to be the starter for this team at some point. You're kind of still figuring out what your running back room is going to look like, but you have a lot of talented running backs in there. Like, it's not like, Lincoln Riley, even, love Jaden Mayava, want him to do the best, but it's not like he has a Caleb Williams on his hands, right? So I think he's not delusional about, like, we have a guy in Mayava that can be, the kind of guy who can make up for all of these different other weaknesses that we have on the offense. I think that, in the Big Ten, you need to control the trenches to win football games. And I think that that's going to be the emphasis, just based on, what they've said there, and just kind of the truth of playing in the Big Ten. Like you said, obviously Mayava's confidence, kind of plays hand in hand with that. But I just think too, like, after the way last season went in terms of losing games you're supposed to win, I think and I hope that a lot of the first few games you'll see more conservative football. And I don't mean that in the sense that, like, oh, USC is going to, like, be scared to play Missouri State. Not in any way at all. But I just think that you're going to see them not taking any of these opponents for granted, not like running flea flickers in the first quarter. Like, you're going to see, I would at least hope that you're going to see running the ball, taking this seriously, treating this game like as seriously as you're going to treat the Michigan and the Oregon and the Notre Dame games later in the year. Like, you can't take any down for granted in the Big Ten, even when it is these early games, because we saw, USC go into Maryland, who didn't win any other Big Ten games last year, and lose that game somehow. So I just think they're, not going to, like I said, they're just not going to let any moment slip. And so I see, their identity in those games not being any looser. Now, you get to the fourth quarter and you're up by, 30 or 40 points, you can start trying stuff. But I think in the first few quarters, you're going to try to treat it like the first quarter of the Oregon game, where you're going to establish the trenches, run the football, and then, you get a couple touchdowns up, then you can start, building on Mayava's confidence. But I think the first priority, and the thing that you will see first in the games, at least I hope it would be what I would do, is establish the run, which you need to establish the offensive line to be able to do, obviously. So.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, that running the ball, which, is generally referred to as being conservative. And obviously we all understand that concept, that running the ball is the conservative play, passing the ball is the aggressive play. But, if you can dominate with the run game, there's nothing really conservative about running the ball. You're just pressing the advantage. You're emphasizing your strength. The other point we have to remind everyone about in terms of running the ball, especially in the context of an early season game, is if you're running the ball, you're shortening the game, which means less of a chance for injury. And, remember, with the college football playoff, teams now have to play 16, 17, potentially 17 games to win the national championship. So because the quest for a national title is now so much longer than it was just 2 years ago, you have to marshal your energies over the course of the full season. You can't be going great guns in every game. So these cupcake games, while of course you want backups to get meaningful snaps, first priority, your starters don't get hurt. Your starters don't get overextended, jeopardized. So that is the other very concrete benefit of running the ball, that you're shortening the game. You have fewer plays in these early season games, so that when you get into that gauntlet, Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, you're fresh. Your guys haven't played any more plays than absolutely necessary. They have a lot in the tank. You want your players to not be susceptible to injury. Obviously, it's not something you can guarantee, but you can certainly improve the odds by managing snap counts early in the season. That is why you play cupcake games, is that you have the breather. You're not required to dig fully deep for that win. Like, that's why Alabama plays the Citadel. We laugh at it. It's the coward's way, but there's a reason why that's done. There's a reason why Nick Saban is sitting on that pile of national championships in Tuscaloosa. Like, there's a reason why he did that. It's not just by accident. So using these early season games to run the ball, it also can shorten games and make sure that this team is really fresh for that mid-season stretch, Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, the stretch that is going to decide significantly what this season looks like.